Well, my name is Bessie Domsky. I'm from Olive Hill, Kentucky. And I'm going to tell you a few things I remember when I was growing up. We went to Clark Hill School, and I remember one day Mom called me in my house, our house, and she had them laid out on the bed, you know, for me to see. It's a white pleated skirt and a teal blue sweater. And I just loved it. I loved it. And we had a big family, you know, 7 kids. And Mom, and Daddy worked brickyards. And we were really, you know, everybody was poor then. And we managed to get along. We had a garden and we had a cow to have milk and stuff like that. My daddy, he had a mule, and he plowed our garden, he'd plant it, and we'd take care of it as kids. And Mom, she done hers, she took care of us and sent us to school. She said we were all going to graduate in 8th grade, and we did. And then I graduated from 12th grade.
And I was a Coleman. My daddy came from Lewis County. He came here and he worked at a grocery store for Ed Coleman, and then he got a job at Harbison Walker, and he worked there for 45 years. And we all lived on College Hill, and there was 9 of us, and we all went to Erie School, and I graduated in 1947.
I lived in Olive Hill since I was 18 years old. I came over here to start working in a store. I worked all week, danced all night on Saturday night. We'd have a dance on the street, and I thought it was more fun to dance than anything. Lots of people thought it was wrong to dance, but I thought it was real fun. We'd go out there and we'd dance. I didn't care what any people thought. I'd dance all night if I wanted to. But I loved to dance better than anything. But I can remember a lot about Olive Hill. I can remember all the houses in Olive Hill. No one ever kept anything very clean and neat. Finally, they got up some kind of ordinance that you had to keep your yard clean and you know, so it would look pretty. But I never paid much attention to it. Out on the back street right up there, I had a store, a jewelry store, and I worked every day. And if you ever think it's fun to work in a jewelry store, you better get another thing coming because it's the hardest job you'd ever have. You have to keep everything clean, and I don't mean just a little bit clean. It has to be really clean. If you didn't, you'd lose everything you had because everything gets dirty. But I had a good time, and I like to dance. I'd get off from work and go. I had 2 children, but they didn't know anything about it. Mother would stay with them, and we'd dance till the sun come up. Lots of nights, and it's the most fun I ever had.
Well, I've lived in Olive Hill all my life. One thing I remember is our church. Olive Hill. It was the Pilgrim Homeless Church, and then it was later the Wesley Church. I've been there longer than anyone. And of course we was flooded out and we're building again. But then when I was a kid, I went to high school and grade school at the Olive Hill High School. And in one of the grades I played a violin in an orchestra that we had. And then later, I started working for Bruce's 5 and 10, and Louis King come and asked me if I would work for King's, and I did. Later on, I married J.W. James from Fleming County, and later we bought the Olive Hill department store. At one time, that was called the Tabor Building. It was that 3-story building that finally was torn down. And it has been said that on the 3rd floor they used to have a skating rink. So later, my brother bought the 5 and 10. We bought it out too. So I had both stores. It's pretty busy. And then my father, he worked for the brickyard. It closed. And then I remember my grandfather, Ben Davis, he had a grocery store where Bethany House is now. And then later he had one in town. And I remember an incident where one guy would come on Saturday night and sit in his truck about time to close. Then he'd go in and buy things because he just thought that was funny to wait and keep it waiting. And later on in years, as I say, we had the Olive Hill department store. And when the brickyards started going down, well, we decided to close out. Then I went into ladies ready to wear, where the dime store was. Then later, I got rid of that, went into a fabric store. And that was about 25 or 30 years ago. And my husband, he worked for 10.5 years for Woodman of the World Insurance Company. So I've been very happy living in Olive Hill. I've had 3 sons. They're all scattered from one end of the United States to the other, Washington, Delaware, and Virginia. Grandchildren in Florida, and my brother is in Michigan. So I've had a happy life in Olive Hill, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. And I can think of a lot of more things, but you don't have time. It was a big excitement one day when the train comes in. Everybody goes to see who's going to get on the train and who's coming off. But the excitement that day was when our president, Truman, went through town. They stopped, and he made a little speech to everybody. So that was a big thing happening in Olive Hill. But I've been from over 40 states, one coast to the other, but nothing like Kentucky and Olive Hill.
Now, I wasn't raised in Olive Hill, but I lived in the road nearby, and I can remember early memories of coming here. I remember getting on the train with my grandmother to see an old train run back then through the town. And I remember getting on the train going to Ashland with my grandmother. I can remember the markets all along the railroad street here, the grocery stores and things. And I remember back then there were more wagons than they were cars. And I can remember coming on Saturday and see their mule teams and wagons tied up the street, up Main Street. I can remember seeing that, and I just barely can remember when the war was over. I mean, this town was crowded, horns was blowing, everybody was hugging and throwing hats in the air, and I just little hanging on my grandma's coattail, and I was scared. I didn't know what was going on, but they really celebrated here in Olive Hill when the Second War was over. I can remember that.
And what we were talking about was a drive-in that used to be in Pleasant Valley. And when I was a kid, we used to come down here and spend the summers down here up on Perry's Branch with my aunt and uncle. And we'd hitchhike over to that drive-in so we could go down the creek and sneak over the fence and go into that drive-in. But what Toots and I was talking about earlier was there was a fella named Stevie Irwin that had a pool room down here on Main Street in Olive Hill. And he always had a problem with postnasal drip. But he had the best cheeseburgers in the country. But when he was cooking them, you could hear that hitting that hot grill. And he had special sauce way before McDonald's ever thought about it. And Toots was telling me, Toots Boggs was telling me that they didn't have a restroom in there. So they just went out the back door and used the restroom when they come back in. They didn't have fool with washing their hands, so they just throw them hamburgers on the grill. And that kind of went in with a special sauce.
And Roger drove all the way from the house.
Yeah, and we used to come down here from Mansfield just to get a Stevie burger. But in '59, the only time I've ever rode a train in my life, we were started down here from Mansfield, and the weather was so bad in the winter of '59, we couldn't drive down here, so we decided to take a train and come in over to Depot right over here in Olive Hill. But I was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio, and where I was born and raised is called Little Kentucky. And there was so many people from here that lived there, they actually had an Olive Hill reunion every year. I don't know if they still have it or not. But a lot of people from this area, when work got difficult down here, they went either into the Mansfield area, or I had several uncles went into Niles, Youngstown area, up that way to work in the steel mills up through there. But they're just, I could probably sit here and make up stories for half a day, but I won't. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
I was just telling that my dad took me and my brother on Sunday and bring us to Olive Hill and give us a quarter apiece to we'd get us a hot dog and a bottle of pop and go to the show for a quarter apiece. That's back a few years back. Yeah, they used to have all these works around here, and I used to work in the limestone mine at Lawton back in 43. 44, yeah, when I went to the Army, 43. Went to the Army and then come out and went back to work at the mines again, you know.
You went to service in 43?
Yeah,
Where was you World War II then?
yeah.
Where did you go in World War II?
European field, Europe, over here, France, Germany, all them places. Few of them. I went from France to up to Germany, you know, Belgium, Holland. Well, I just want to tell about the trip we had to Washington, D.C. All the World War II veterans out of Carter County. Carter County furnished the money and rented buses, took us all to Washington, D.C. for the World War II monument. And they just wasn't done quick enough. I mean, you know, a lot of them had already passed away. It ought to have been done a few years before. Your dad already, Collier, he'd already passed away. So it was a good trip, the best trip I ever made, I guess. Besides coming home from overseas. That's the best trip. Okay.
The houses used to go up the street a long ways, almost a mile. Now I live in 3 rooms. I don't like to live there, but I'll live there until I can find the house. I had a house down in town, but the water got in it and it ruined that house, tore it down. It didn't wash it away, but it just tore it up till it wouldn't be worth building it back. My son came and looked at it and he said, "Mother, me and my brother will build it, but it isn't worth it." He said, "You can build your new house easier than you can build this house." So I didn't fool with building it back, but there were houses. I don't know how many houses the water got in. It got in every town, every house in town, except those up on the hill too high.
Well, here I am back again talking. And this lady sitting next to me is named Betty Cameron. And she graduated almost with me from here in school.
We
And
went
wanted
to
tell
Erie
you-
School.
We wanted to tell you about making our dresses to graduate in. They were white, and they had little cap sleeves, and they were long.
And we had to make them before we could graduate.
In home ec, we had to make our graduation dress. And that's what we all wore. Well, the boys did one. And me and Daddy made our dress in home ec. And the other girls did too, you know. And,
Erie School was the Methodist school, so we all went to the Methodist church, and we had our services down to the Methodist church, and then we had the other up to the school.
And we had, our preacher was named Edwin the Masters, and I think other people that graduated from the Erie School, they knew him too. And I remember I had a picture of him, and I was shaking hands with him with my long dress on. And I don't know, I must have lost it in the flood or something, because I don't have it anymore.
It was 47 when I graduated.
I graduated in 46.
I guess you've lived here all your life, haven't you, John? Pretty well?
Oh, yeah.
And we were...
Yeah, I was born and raised up to be a small kid back on Blueberry Ridge.
But you came to town and moved up on Blueberry Ridge. And we was talking about the flood, and you said you were 16 years old when that flood happened. Could you tell us a little bit, maybe, what was happening right before? Of course, we know it was raining, bound to have been raining.
All these floodwaters from 37 come out of the north. All except in Tiger Creek itself. It comes straight down, it come out of Round County, out of the Porter Creek area, and that was Tiger Creek. Oh, it had been Tiger Creek. All of these streams on the right, which was coming from the north, was running in to Tiger Creek. Well, it would rain and rain and rain, hour after hour, no let up, no communications about the weather at that time, and nobody had, everybody didn't have radios, and they put the electric all out. It wouldn't done you any good anyhow, what you had. You just had to take it by the way it come, day by day, hour after hour. Now, many times, all the field had been flooded since that and before that. Many times, but nothing like 1937, because they had cloud bursts. They had cloud would bust in the north, send these streams out across the hills and over the hills until it reached the lowest part of the whole country, which was the valley here in Olive.
Well, during that flood, didn't the chief of police try to arrest you during the flood?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was.
Yeah,
I thought that was comical. How deep? About how deep was the water?
Right on the corner up here where Walker's restaurant is, there was a barber shop set there, Tom Parsons' barber shop. Him and Elvis Stone ran a barber shop. That's where I first got in the water. It was up about ankle deep, right in that barber shop. And they stood by and they kept it swept out of the building before it damaged anything in the barber shop. See? Well, I hit right in the middle of the highway. I got out there and I'd wade down the street until the water got too deep for me to wade. Way it would have come flopping around. All kinds of stuff coming down the street, and garbage, and occasionally a hog would pass you. The chicken trying to fly out, some already drowned and gone. And cows are bawling, all on the railroad on higher ground. And all of us people, us animals, was in this stream of water. But okay, time I got down here to the hotel right here across the street, the water was getting too deep to wade, so I began to swim. I'd swim all the way down the creek, and water was from hill to hill. It was an ocean of water. So, what am I going to do? It's getting deeper. So, I worked my way in front of the police station.
Yeah, that's where you got in trouble.
Right in front of the police station. There was 10 foot of water in front of the police station. The water had already backed up from Whitetown due to the devil backbone holding it back. It all backed up in town here, and there was water from hill to hill. I worked my way down. Well, everybody was hollering, John, get out of that water, get out of that water. There's anything could come down this street and round you. Well, they had Whitetown blocked off and a barricade up. So nobody with a boat, with nothing, could get into the Whitetown area. And I had to stop right in front of the police station, which was 10 foot of water. Well, just on the left of the police station, there was a big grocery store run by Virgil Stallard. And they called it the Cut Rate Grocery. Well, it had been flooded, and he had men in there helping getting his feet up off, and it was a little higher off the street, the building was. And but yet water was coming in and out. So he wanted to get all of his stuff up out of the war room, get it on higher ground, work it in towards the ceiling, so he could save all of it that he possibly could save from the water. And the water was bouncing in and bouncing out. So they tried to shovel it out, tried to sweep it out, wouldn't do it. So he had a half a dozen men in there working. Well, here I was out here in the middle of the water, swimming, just floating around on my back, taking it easy.
Relaxing, like you were on vacation, weren't you?
Yeah. And all of a sudden, I heard somebody holler, "Who is that nut out there in that water?" Well, somebody said, "That's John Carter." Said, "Is that Gus Carter's boy?" "Yeah, that's Gus Carter's boy." And he told me, he said, "You come out of that water right now. Said, if that water goes down, I'm going to grab you up and throw you in jail for 30 days.
Who is that said that?
That was Jimmy Carpenter. He had run for chief of police and got elected. He was on the ballot back then.
Yeah, back then he ran for chief of police.
So he said, "Come on out of there." I said, "How you going to put me in jail if there's 10 foot of water in it? I'd be better off out here." Well, the jail was washed away. Everything was washed away and gone. So we argued around about that so long. And he had a big club that he had a leather strap wrapped around that. He said, he took it and he done it. He said, "I'll get you when the water goes down." And Virgil Stallard stepped out. He had a big pair of hip boots on, plus everything else. They had took the shield of water off of him. He said, "Chief, who is that out there in that water?" Said, "It's a Carter boy." Said, "I boarded him out." Said, "He's under arrest." "Let's get him out of there. I need him in here." Get him out of there. And no trial. Now, you know there's jail that's washed away. You know there's no jail. There's no nothing. He said, "I just wanted to make sure he don't get away. When it goes down, I'm going to put him in it." "No," Virgil said, "you're not going to put him in it. I've got a job in here for him to do. Bring him in." So I went in and helped put the feed up. Of course, I could pick up a 100-pound bag of feed when I was 16-year-old and throw it on my back and run with it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we're sitting here at Sandy's Flowers and Gifts in Olive Hill, Kentucky, and we're talking about what great fun we've had working on the Sesquicentennial history, and we're all having a cherry Coke, and that's what we used to have here at D. Hart's Pharmacy years ago when we were young. We all were young once upon a time, so we've got a lot of memories, and this history study has brought back different things. And sitting in this building, girls, reminds me of a time when I was in the 6th grade and everybody was brought to town to the doctor's office upstairs because we all contacted scarlet fever and we were in quarantine. And I remember them calling the pharmacist down here, Miss DeHart, and saying, "We've got a group up here that needs medicine." So all of our parents had to come upstairs and get us and take us home. So you have any special memories of this building?
all the memories I have are happy memories spent in this place. I can remember as a little child when the D. Hart's daughter, Sarah, and I, who my parents had the Western Auto Store a couple of doors down, and we spent many happy hours in this place. And then as we grew older, this became the loafing spot for all the kids after school. Everyone would come in and get a cherry Coke. And it was, everything about this building is happy memories to me.
I know Sandy's got a lot of memories about Olive Hill in general. Sandy's got the greatest memory of us three, I think, but
well, I was just talking one day, I thought we left an important part of something out in dining with the past was when we didn't include the bells and whistles and things that we had in Olive Hill. It seemed like the whole town ran on a whistle or a bell. I remember the fire whistle blew every day at 5 o'clock, and at that time, all the stores locked up, business was over, and it wasn't open till the next morning. And on Sunday, everything was closed. You better have your milk, bread, gas, and everything. So that's some memories.
When you were in a store, when that whistle blew, if it was 5 o'clock, all the customers knew to leave.
Yes.
And they would exit as quickly as they could.
And then remember the brickyard whistle that blew every day at 12 o'clock, and that was time for dinner. And then at 6 o'clock it blew, and that was time for supper. And that's when we still called it breakfast, dinner, and supper.
I can remember those whistles and wondering what would happen if we needed a fire whistle to blow, how they would confuse it with all those whistles.
Well, that was a confusing time. I believe it was 55 when Olive Hill won the regional tournament, and they were met at the city limits by the ambulance and the fire whistles and everything. And elderly people were really concerned. They thought the whole town was on fire.
This has been one of the most interesting projects that I've ever worked on. I have learned more about our little town and the businesses that made it what it was. It's just been wonderful. It's been a learning experience, and I would say that very few people realize how many businesses through the years have been in this little town. At one time, we even had a distillery, which not many people knew about. And, excuse me, in the late 50s and 60s, we had 5 car dealerships. And during that period, you didn't have to go out of town to buy anything, because anything you would want to purchase, you could find right here in Olive Hill.
Right. I think it's those roots that has made Olive Hill what it is today. We know that we're not thriving anymore, and we know that we're struggling economically. But I think it's those strong roots that we have that has kept Olive Hill a community and a municipal. And we know that we're doing all we can now to try to bring it back and restore it, especially after the disasters that we've gone through.
In 1890, the first brick plant opened in Olive Hill, and the brickyards were a blessing, and also they were kind of a curse to Olive Hill. They were a blessing in that when the brickyards first opened, the surrounding communities and surrounding counties, the brickyards act like a magnet, and they drew people to Olive Hill, and the population of Olive Hill grew very quickly. The bad thing about the brickyards in the beginning was this was before there was such a thing as labor laws. And the kind of labor that the men had to do was just physical, brute labor. They were broken down very quickly. The thing that I have always found about these brickyarders was that you didn't find a lot of old brickyarders. The brickyarders, they died at a fairly young age. And when the men first started working, they had to work by the job. The company would say X number of brick has to be wheeled or X number of brick have to be molded. And if it took a man 10 hours, 12 hours, or 14 hours, he had to stay there until the job was done to get paid. And the pay, I guess according to their standards at that time, was pretty good. They got $2 a day or $10 a week. And it was really difficult work, though. And what we've been able to find out, and talking with some of the older members, they said that the work was so difficult that a lot of times they would allow the children, if they had older boys, they would come to work and work with their dad so that dad could get the job done and go home. Because again, at that time, there was no child labor laws. There was nothing that said the kids couldn't work. Many a boy, 15, 16 years old, would go to work and be a full-time wage earner at the brickyard in 1900. So the brickyards were a good thing because it drew people and it gave the people of this community jobs for nearly 80 years. And later on, unions came along and child labor laws and different things which changed the face of the brickyards. But the brickyards, good thing for the town of Olive Hill.
Hi, my name is Barbara Sellers. This year, 2011, is a very special year for Olive Hill, Kentucky, as it marks 150 years for the Sesquicentennial. Happy birthday, Olive Hill. As many of you know, I am the author of A Moment in Time, which many of you have read this book, which is about my grandfather, who invented the retractable landing gear and also had the first powered flight in Kentucky in 1908. With the proceeds of this book, I have been able to give back to a lot of charities. I was very devastated learning when I was up in Chicago of the floods that happened here last year. So it really touched my heart. So I'm just so happy to be able to give back to Olive Hill. Olive Hill goes way back with my ancestors owning the property in Grand back in the early 1800s and up until my grandfather built Blakemore in 1895. So happy birthday, Olive Hill, and may the good Lord protect you.
My husband and I are the third generation, I guess I'm the third generation, owner of a business in Olive Hill called Tackett's Furniture. This business has been there since, we think, about 1938. It was, I guess, originally started by my aunt, Ola Baker Burchett, and her husband Wilford. They started a furniture type business, and their first location was in the building that later, most recently, maybe not most recently, I think there was another business there, but people remember it as Sparky Sporting Goods. That building isn't there anymore. My grandmother joined the business, again, I'm saying around 1938, because her business changed. This is, I guess, another story about how technology changes the economy, and it's a personal account of that. My grandmother and her husband, my step-grandfather, Reese Tackett, and my grandmother's name was Bertha Tackett, they had a dairy farm up on Blueberry Ridge, Hilltop Dairy. And when pasteurization came into the picture, small businesses, well, all dairy businesses, I guess, were having to make the decision about whether they were going to go bigger and invest the money in the equipment or close their doors. And our family decided to close their doors. The dairy farm ended, and another business opened up. She joined her daughter and son-in-law in the furniture business, and she was such a great business lady. She had treated people very well in her dairy business. People remembered that. For example, during the Depression, they would deliver milk even if people couldn't afford it. And folks just don't forget those kindnesses. So after she came into the business with Ola and Wilford, the business really took off. And they outgrew that building and they moved up the street to the location where we are now. My father had electronics and radio training in the Navy, and when he was discharged from the Navy, he joined that business, and he had his own little portion of the business called Baker's TV Sales and Service. It was like he was just trained for that, and he came in at the time when people were starting to get TVs, radios, and stereos, and that just really took off. He was also a gifted salesman, just like his mom. And so the business thrived, and it served our family very well. When I lived away for 30 years or so, and when I came back to Olive Hill after my father died in '07, I went to the store to start to clean things up, maybe sell out inventory. I really wasn't sure what to do. And while we had our doors open and we were selling out the inventory, person after person after person came in and said, please, please don't close your doors. I think first and foremost, Olive Hill didn't want to lose another business, but they had such great memories of the business, and they could remember coming in as kids with their parents who did business there or their grandparents who did business there, and told story after story about how our family had treated them as customers, and they had not forgotten that, and they had remained loyal to the business as a result of that. And I realized that, once you close those doors, those stories are gone. And so much of your family history is gone, and a part of the history of the community. And I know the next generation may not remember them, but we're making our own history by continuing it and keeping the doors open.
The first train rolled into Olive Hill, Kentucky, January of 1882. The railroad had been completed in 1881, and it was called the E.L. and Big Sandy Railroad, which stood for Elizabethtown, Lexington, and Big Sandy. I looked at the 1880 federal population census, and I saw that over 80 blacks from Virginia and 2 or 3 Irish, they were the ones that worked on the railroad, that built the railroad. And one odd note on that, the enumerator said that a railroad manager, that wherever their hats were on their heads was where their home was. So they was working on the railroad in 1880, 1881, it was finished in 1882. The actual town of Olive Hill was actually up on the hill around where Camp 60 was. But because the railroad came through in 1882, everybody started moving down around the railroad tracks to be closer to the business. In 1882, there were 3 motels in Olive Hill. Now 129 years later, there are 0. So that gives you a little bit of idea of what the railroad would mean to a town by having commerce and everything. I saw, and doing research through Olive Hill newspapers for the last 50 years, or the last 75 years actually, a lot of the businessmen, they rode the train daily, whether it been to Cincinnati or Huntington or whatever, and that's where that's how they traveled to buy supplies for their stores and come back. So the railroad was just such an awesome part of the town. Also, I have records from the General Refractories brickyard plant from the teens, where they shipped between 1 to 2 million brick a month. And of course, with something shipping like that, they were located right by the railroad, as was the Harbison and Walker brickyard. Some of the other brickyards in the county were located by the railroad, and for that reason. So it's just hard to add about the measure of the brickyard. Also, looking through some of those old newspapers, I saw where some of the movie stars of the day actually rode the train into Olive Hill and ate at the restaurants. Some of the cowboy stars came to the movie houses and would sign autographs or whatever, stay the day. Again, they came in on the train and they rode out on the train. So it's just such an awesome part of the town. My own personal experience with the railroad, I was across the street and I saw something going on one day, so I walked over, and actually it was the last scheduled stop of the train coming through Olive Hill, so I was in that photo. And it's hard to imagine, even though the railroad's been gone for probably almost 30 years, that the train come through Olive Hill for 100 years, and that's just hard to imagine. And I guess a personal touch also, as well as where I worked on the railroad at Raceland Car Shops for over 30 years at a heavy repair shop. A lot of the cars that I'd worked on at that time probably had run over these tracks, so that's just something I was thinking about when we were talking one day about the railroad.
The importance of education, I think, has always been realized by the people in the eastern and the western ends of Carter County. It's already been established, the town of Olive Hill was established in 1861. It wasn't until 1884 that the first school was established, and it was built on the site near where Blueberry Ridge Road starts, where the original town began. A few years later, that school became overcrowded, so in 1897, the second school was built, and it was built down near where the C&O depot is located, where the railroads were. In 1921, the first school built on top of what is normally known as Schoolhouse Hill was established. This was a brick building and which served to give the students in this end of the county an education equivalent to what would now be an 8th grade education. Okay, in 1929, the old Olive Hill High School opened its doors, and this educated the students in the western end of the county in grades 1 through 12 until 1971. And in 1971, the old Olive Hill High School closed, and the new West Carter High School on the eastern end of Olive Hill was opened. Now, in addition to the tax-supported schools that I've mentioned, Olive Hill was also fortunate enough to have Erie School. It was a private school funded by the Methodist Episcopalian Church of New York City. Their women's division decided that this area needed a school which would provide more than a 5-month educational opportunity for the students. Its basis was Bible teachings, in addition to the practical arts of cooking, sewing, and nursing. What I think is the lovely thing about these two buildings, they're still in use today for educational purposes. The Erie School houses the Head Start program for 5 counties, Carter, Lawrence, Elliott, Greenup, and Lewis counties. And the old Olive Hill High School, now the property of the Olive Hill Historical Society, is providing several cultural and educational opportunities for our citizens.
Olive Hill, like many communities, can look to certain times in their past that are pivotal points where the towns have either gone one direction or another. One of those pivotal dates for Olive Hill was June the 7th, 1917. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the town people was awakened by the scream of train whistles, where the engineers that were coming on for the morning shift saw a fire burning in one of the town buildings. The train whistles continued to blow for 2 hours straight, trying to get the people out of their beds and into town. Because in 1917, there was no fire department in Olive Hill, and anytime there was a fire, there had to be a bucket brigade. So the bucket brigade began fighting the fire, and almost every person in town turned out to help the merchants move their merchandise out of the buildings and into the street away from the fire. After the fire was over, a lot of changes happened in Olive Hill. Up until 1917, there was no building codes in Olive Hill, so anyone that wanted to build a building could just construct a building anywhere and do it any way they wanted to. The fire in 1917 showed people that there needed to be building codes. The main street in Olive Hill was made of brick buildings, but when you got behind the main buildings, the buildings that were in back of the main part of town was tar paper and wooden buildings. The fire was supposed to have originated in a restaurant owned by a Clay, and they think that it was probably a grease fire, and it spread quickly over to a pool room, and the pool room was storing a lot of paper. And once the fire hit the paper, the whole town, the whole section of the main downtown went up in flames. The fire lasted almost 6 hours. They finally put it out sometime around 7 o'clock in the morning. There was a lot of photos taken of the fire. One of the most interesting photos is the one showing the bank, because at the time people thought of security a little differently than they do now, and the main vault of the bank was placed in the window of the bank instead of back away where people couldn't see it. So if you look at some of the pictures, you will notice that the vault is right in the window of the bank. This was the turning point of Olive Hill. A lot of people say that the town has never recovered from this 1917 fire. The buildings in Olive Hill in 1917, most of them were 4-story buildings. When they restored the buildings, they did build them back, but most of them became 2-story buildings and on a much smaller scale.
Tigers Creek meanders 99.2 miles northeasterly through the counties of Carter and Greenup County on its way to the Ohio River. The stream is named in honor of Michael Tigert, an early pioneer who settled along the banks of Tigers Creek. And legend has it that while attempting to cross the stream on horseback during a flood, he fell off and drowned. And so for that reason, the stream was named in his honor. Along the route of Tigers Creek, there is one good-sized community, and that is the community of Olive Hill, Kentucky. Olive Hill has a population of about a little over 2,000 people. And originally, when the town was established in the first decade of the 1800s, it was located on one of the higher hills overlooking Tigers Creek. But when the railroad came through this part of the world, the community moved closer to the railroad, which was down in the floodplain of Tigers Creek, in order to help with the commerce of the town. And when that happened, Olive Hill began to have some difficulties with flooding. During the time that Olive Hill's been in existence, since 1861, there have been numerous floods in this town that has caused serious devastation among the businesses and the people living in the community. In the last decade alone, there have been 3 significant floods that have caused Olive Hill to have to virtually rebuild. And but each time that this is done, the community is dedicated to making sure that the community survives and that the people of Olive Hill will persevere. Downstream from Olive Hill, Tigers Creek goes for a considerable distance through a gorge. This is caused by the underlaying rock in the area, which is limestone. As the water reaches the limestone rock, it cuts down through the rock, creating a gorge-like setting. And sometimes this water in Tigers Creek finds its way into cracks and crevices below the stream bed and enlarges cracks in the rock to create caves. And you will find that in Carter County there are over 200 named caves, many of which are within a 20-mile radius of Olive Hill, Kentucky. Sometimes when the water flows so rapidly down the stream bed, you find that debris floating down gets stuck in the meanders of the stream, and it causes water to back up into the community, and this is why sometimes the community has serious flooding.
The floods that Olive Hill experienced in 2010 were probably among the most devastating this community has ever been through. I think the fact that we had one right after the other really multiplied the impact. I think the community is still suffering from the effects of this and also the accumulative effects of flood after flood, year after year. But one hopeful thing that has happened, and I think this happened particularly because we had 2 floods last year, is that we now have a restoration group that is dedicated completely to facilitating revitalization and restoration in this community. This group is called the Olive Hill Council for Planning and Restoration, or Olive Hill CPR, as we like to say, and we were formed because of a specific program that FEMA now has. It's a relatively new program. And they come into the community and they organize volunteer citizens around this mission of restoration. They were with us for several months and they gave us tremendous support, tremendous guidance, lots of good materials and resources, and also got us connected to other agencies and organizations that could partner with us in this process of restoration. Part of what we have done, and actually this was in the beginning stages and it got us off the ground, was to have community forums during which citizens of the community could express their concerns and their desires for their vision of Olive Hill in the future, and also to vote on the things that they felt were most important. Those ideas from the community are what have been factored into our project areas. The very #1 project area is economic development, and you could almost say that everything folds into that, especially flood mitigation. We're thinking that for Olive Hill to ever become revitalized, we need to work toward being more prepared for the next time that it could happen. This group has been working since, I guess we started last November, and we've had a variety of projects, some focused on cleanup in downtown. And this summer we've done an economic survey where we have polled both consumers and businesses about what it's like to conduct business in Olive Hill and what it's like to be a customer in Olive Hill. And those results are going to be compiled later this fall, and they will help us develop ideas about what we will do in our future. We also have a counterpart group of youth called Hope. This group is very much dedicated to a brighter future for Olive Hill, and they really want to see a cleaner, safer community. And one of their project goals, probably their main project goal, is the development of a family recreation center here in Olive Hill. They're a wonderful group of students, and they're at the ready to help with any project related to making our community a better place to live.
Are you in the crowd? Just the crowd. She's a big winner of the icon too, folks. Yeah. She wins it even though if she ain't here. We got contact information. Please put your hands together for all the folks who got into the iPad too. Just the crowd. Answer time to state. Answer time.